Hello all. It's 5:30. We're ready to start. Max, let me know if the sound and image is good.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, off we go. So we're going to talk about Jacob's one today. Before we get to that, as the smallest one from our list of UNESCO sites, World Heritage Sites, just want to talk about the booklet, because somebody over break actually wanted to get started, and I kind of slowed her down, saying just scan all your work now because I want to do that tonight. So now we're 7 weeks away from the wrap up. And so some people might be ready to actually start to build out the book bit by bit. So you've got this larger book that's got all the text and all the images and stuff we wrote for you. And then inside that, you've been drawing, you've been sort of illustrating it, right, with your own sketches based off of those videos. So I don't need to see the book. You don't have to mail me your book, but you do have to either mail me or drop off a copy of a small booklet of just your artwork from the semester. And that way I get a very complete picture at the end. It's worth a chunk of your percentages there. And it really is kind of simple, where you're simply going to scan everything first, and you're going to drop them into a 5.5 by 8.5 vertical format here. Typically, it seems like students always do 2 or 3 per page tops because they want to show the artwork. So it might be, a 12 or 14 page booklet. And so I'll go through that steps there. I emailed you the little Word doc on it. I know a lot of you know InDesign inside and out now. It might be new to other people. If you haven't used it before and you have access to the Adobe suite, you probably should learn how to do it, because you'll use it the rest of your careers no matter what field you're in. It's really a great program because it's designed to do book layouts and kind of graphic art and stuff. You can also do it in Word or other kind of paste up files, but they're just so mechanically challenged that if you've got access to Adobe, use InDesign. So this will then lay out in sort of a one pager there, just the discrete steps of what you have to kind of click through. It seems like a lot when I typed it out on one page for you. It's actually very easy. And once you get the flow of it, you have a lot of control over actually designing the pages then. It's not quite as clumsy as something like Word. So the key here is that we want them all vertical. Those will be part of the display I'll have in Syrup when we're done. And you'll start in Photoshop, just sort of collect your images, because first you'll take your original book and probably scan all the pages you drew into. Then you need to crop away all the text in the rest of the book, so you're only left with just your image. So this came from a certain part of the book, but all you see now when you show it to me is just your page with Hoden and the Winslow house on it. And so that's where I certainly go by assuming you're all going to do all the drawings. That's not all the case with a class this size. So that's a problem if you don't have all the drawings done. And there's really sort of a quality check too, in terms of what level of commitment you did to the drawing. So let me explain that a little bit here, and then I'll show you some of the samples of past work. So here is the Gale house that I just sort of took snippets of from past students. Oh, that's kind of right, isn't it? Let's drop that down. There we go. And now you're going to see kind of in a range here. There are some students, let me zoom in a bit too. Forgive the sheet being all shiny. Sometimes they print it on more of a gloss type of text. Some of the students do a really good job of articulating what they're drawing to the book as if they're little miniature renderings, and are being really attentive to accuracy in the drawing and to show the light, shade, and shadow and the value there. So you're really sort of honoring Wright when you really kind of draw it to the point where I try to have you draw it too, and you kind of get a more complete picture. But you'll see through this range of just a series of Gale residences, there's a variety of quality. And so that's one of the things I'm looking for in your booklet. Did you actually give your all in terms of determining all these different design ideas in 2D and 3D throughout the book? So here, for instance, the student lost control of the form kind of in plainer language because they didn't use any kind of vanishing point for it. So things are tilting. They're not vanishing to the same points. So things just got a little clumsy through there. And even though the value is kind of nice for it, it doesn't show that sort of really attentiveness to what was going on there. And since it's probably in my work and many of your peers' work, you might want to think about, if you've got things like this now, you have a chance to redraw that video if you think they're a little bit clumsy. Because a lot of you might have gotten better towards the end of the class. You might want to revisit some of the earlier work. So there's a range of sort of what I'll see, just like your house designs themselves. There's going to be a median for the class in terms of what the bulk of the students are doing. Then there's students that do well beyond that, and students start a little bit behind it. And that's how I'll evaluate the book in terms of what you turn in. Again, over those 14 pages, the bulk of them are going to be the ones from the book, but you'll also put in images from the 8 major drawings we do, like the Jacob's one today, that might be interspersed or at the back of the book. And then obviously your project needs to go in too. So just to go through this as a range really quick, so you see the change of what people are working with. And what you want to do is make sure you take these to a scanner. Don't try to do it with your phone, because you won't like how it's lit. You might be off kilter, make it trapezoidal. So take them to a scanner. There's a lot of scanners around any university where you just get the 11x17 platen, so you can do the whole book at once. Then extract those out in Photoshop. So you're just showing me your artwork alone, not the rest of the book. And then sort of at the lower end of it, you can tell people are just kind of in a rush. They kind of do the outline of the form, then they go to the next film. So they really weren't engaged for the entire 20 to 30 minutes on the time they're doing the Gale House. And so I'm looking for that. You're going to tell me by your book sketches just how engaged you were to the content. Now, how you put it together is typically chronological. I'm not looking to learn from your book. I'm just looking to check the quality of it. So you can mix that up if you like, but sort of earliest to latest makes sense. So let me zoom back out a little bit for this book. That's taken from the cover of the book itself, and then working into the idea that when you put your image down, what I'd like you to do really quickly, because it's really easy in InDesign again to type into it, is tell me in your words. Don't just take text from online or Wikipedia or from the text itself, but in your words, why did I want you to draw this? Why is this important? And if you can tell me that now, you're actually studying for the final exam. So in a sense, this is a culmination of your artwork, but it's also your study guide for the final exam. So each one has a couple sentences tops, and it kind of talks about the importance of this. I know why it's important, but now you're going to tell me in your own words. So it's kind of a reflection on the semester, because by the time you finish your book, you're going to be a couple months away from some of the drawings you did back in early February. So it's kind of a standardized layout, because it's kind of laid out for you anyway, because the plan and this was already done, laid out for you on the projection. So you can manipulate that how you like. Some students will be more of the color, some will be won't use the full value. So I'm looking for the potential you're showing us. Because in a sense, this, just like your house project, this is also a gift back to Wright. You want to tell him that you spent the semester with him and you're kind of proud of how you interpreted the work. So that was by Joe from a couple of years ago. This is from Andrew, who was a civil engineering student at the time. He left after 4 years with his bachelor's there and came here and finished his master's last August. And now he's practicing in Milwaukee as an architect. And Andrew was kind of an unusual student. He took a couple of our courses online in the architecture department as a sophomore and started to talk to me about, should I transfer now? And I told him, it's up to you. You're half the way to getting your CE degree. It might be nice in the field to have that as well, and then come for the 2 years master's. And so that's what he chose to do. And so stuck it out with engineering. But he realized kind of early on that he wasn't quite satisfied with just the engineering career, as if something was missing, more the maybe creative aspect. So he did his panel by panel. You can choose to frame them out. It's nice to, the paper is a little bit off-white, in the book. And so you can scan it. And when you go into Photoshop, you can actually adjust it a little bit. So a lot of times in artwork, I'll go to Photoshop, I'll go to the function of levels, which is under, first you go adjustments first and levels. And if you move the arrow a little bit, it takes all the work you did and just makes it more pronounced. It adds to your value, crispens your lines, and kind of settles the drawing finally. So you can do one or two key things in Photoshop to kind of spank the whole book up if you like. This student shows, Eli showed his piece at the top. A couple of years ago, the project was, if the students chose to actually do a three-dimensional object and build it, they didn't have to do a residence. They could actually do then furniture or small scale interiors, things like that, things they could actually go down to the shop and make, which is a much more difficult thing to simply draw the home. But some students took off on that and built down in the basement. So here's some subject panels from Eli's book. Patrick's. So everybody's got a stylist. They got your own hand in this. There's personality to it. Some students are a little more sketchy, some are more mini renderings, and there's a whole variety. I like to see how your hand shows itself through the course of your book. Now, one of the tricky things about this is I can't give you details on this one-pager sheet, because to make a booklet out of it, you're double-siding pages that flip onto each other. It's not as simple as just printing it out from left to right, because then you're not making a book. So each printer has got a different process to feed pages 1, 3, 5, 7, 9 through first. Then you pull out your document and you feed it again. And then you might have to rotate it or flip it, and that depends on your printer. So I didn't specify how you'll actually get that accomplished. So make sure when you come to the print, you read about it to see what the appropriate way is to make a paginated type of block out of it. And then people simply staple at the edge here, and that's fine for a binding. Okay, so those, when I sent out the calendar, those I need because of time to go through your, we're going to move pretty quickly here through more and more percentages of grades for you as we finish off the semester. So I need to have everything submitted properly and on time. So this project for the booklet, I need on that last final study day, which is for UWM, and I'm only going through UWM here because the Platteville and Madison students will work different on this in terms of dates and when their final days are and their timings for final exams are. But I need everybody's book in my hands by Friday at noon on the 12th. And that's critical because then I've got X number of days to turn in grades the following week, which is exam week for UWM. So plan for that. Obviously, the people in Madison, you're not going to drive your book here. You're going to mail it. But to get it into my hands by Wednesday, you have to postmark your mailing by Friday, postmark it by the 10th on Wednesday. And that way it may come Saturday, that's okay, or may come Monday, that's okay. But at least you went 2 days ahead of time to get it to us here in Milwaukee. So I'll start with the UWM students that are local because that'll give me a whole pile to grade over the weekend and move towards the other students afterwards. So that's the deadline for both. Try to get here by noon. If you're done early, mail it early, and I'll collect it from my mail and put it in the box for you. Just look for the box in the hallway if you're local, want to drop it off for the UWM students.
I have a question.
Sure.
So with that booklet, that is with all of the drawings we do in class and
Right.
with all of the videos posted online.
Right. So if you drew it, if you designed something, show it to me.
Okay. And the like class house project.
That's it, right? Even if it's
Okay.
like if you did sort of study sketches, make a page of those too to show me how
Okay.
your plan evolved. Maybe I haven't seen that, but show me that as well. Because I'm going to
Okay.
get the big final page. You're going to give me one beautiful plate, architectural plate, much like Wright did for like the Ladies' Home Journal, where he'll really articulate and sell a project by, let's say the screen you're looking at is 11 by 17. You're going to have a diminutive size plan because this is too big for it, but you'll have the plan, you'll have the 2 extra elevations and the interior perspective of the key room. And that's the big, almost if you're trying to sell that to a third party market when you're not in the room with them. And so you're going to have to downsize some of your images, but I wouldn't I wouldn't draw them small in the beginning. What you should probably do is draw your final perspectives, full page, scan those, and then put the 4 images smaller together. So work big, so when you shrink down, it's higher quality when it's small. If you work too small on your original, it's hard to get detail into it. So every one of your final drawings should just be a full page. So for instance, here's an old sketch of Jacob's one, but it's a full page of ideas. So this is 11 by 17, this is 11 by 17, this is, scan them, then you can bring higher quality drawings and put them on one page together. So it'll be really rich when you're done. And the way you put out the pattern there, sort of like, it's like a book page design you're going to do for this final presentation.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
And then, are we able to view our grades now from things that we submitted previously, or do we
Right.
have
So
to wait for that?
your second grade's coming up next week. That's where I review your, because everything gets a second kick. We look at it first in quick design, then you kind of submit the formal. So you did that with your exterior perspectives and your plan. The hardest drawing you do all semester is this interior. So now here's your second kick of the can next week. When I'm done with that, Tuesday night, you'll have your first 10% that I'll send out in terms of your 20% there. Then everything comes back kind of fast at the end because it's 50% for your project. It's 30% for your book. Am I doing that right? Yeah, it's 30% to add to the 20% you got. So it's 50% total there. And then the book's 30% and the final exam is 20% at the end. So you'll see 20% by the end of Tuesday next week of how you're doing so far. Okay, so let's pull out your base sheet then for our subject today. Jacob's one. Our reference slide. I'm going to brighten this up a little bit. And I'm hoping that certainly all the Madison students by now should have at least walked by, because it's, within a mile or so from where their housing is in Madison for most of you, on your way down University, just to get a glimpse of the exterior, because it's, if you're a World Heritage site, that's pretty provocative to make sure you see that firsthand. And again, if you get a handful of students who want to see it all at once, I'll make the call for you to let the Wright group that runs tours there let you in. So let me know ahead of time for that. Okay, a little more value here. 42 is always good. Okay, so Jacob's one's the first, even though some will argue that the Willie home in Minneapolis it's not considered part of the Usonian language of homes, that this in 1937 is kind of the start of that generation of ideas he had. But there's some pieces of the puzzle that he was working on there. He was drifting away from the prairie home to reach the middle class, so to speak. So to give you an idea then, and this is not unlike what, it seems like 2/3 of the class chose Usonian. It certainly is a family of ideas. So here are Wright's buildings. They were modeled by ARC 100 students a couple of years ago. And you can see that the language, I keep stacking them up here, is very repetitive and thematic, just like the prairie homes were. And they're all going to share these same principles. And when they kind of build up this way, it's almost like doing kind of a city or streetscape for them. So I think there's probably, somewhere around high 40s of extant Usonians that are still out there now. He had designs for many more that never actually got built. But this is where a lot of you are at with drawing your perspectives. If the software isn't working for you, to do a nice sort of finished model there, then photographic, then draw into it to obviously claim your perspectives. And you don't need to have as much information because you can draw more into it if you like too. So if you're having trouble controlling your three-dimensional image and your exterior perspectives, just build a simple Strathboard model, kind of chord out for the plan there, and then you kind of develop your page that way. So you can see that once the Jacob's one is done, he was on his way with a very systemized way of providing for multiple people. So the American systems built, kind of had a short run there in the 1915 and 1918. And then the Depression stopped everything for everybody. And he came out of the Depression with two major commissions. Obviously, Falling Water was one of them. And then Johnson Wax, close to us in Racine, is the second one. And then a year later, he got tested by Herbert Jacobs. So Herbert Jacobs wants to know, because he worked for the local newspaper in Madison. So it's kind of like a little bit of theater for him so he could write about it and talk about this local genius that's over there in Spring Green, and see if he can actually get the Wizard of Great Homes to actually do something for the rest of us. So his test for Wright was, build me that home for $5,000. And that's, we don't know what that means until you go online and check the inflation ratio. But if you go to 1937 and plug in $5,000, then you put in 2023, and there's multiple inflation sites that do this. So they account for the growth of what the real value was for our time back in 1937. So $5,000 would be right around $100,000 today, which is really an inexpensive home, because I don't think I could build or design something this small and this quality for probably under $250,000 or $300,000. So this was really under the norm back then for a home. So it wasn't just build a nice small home and it was a amount to replace. This was really cheap. So if he solves this, a lot of people could really take off on that. And it won't be in Wright's career, but it will be in the mid-century modern idea of the ranch home, where the rest of builders across the United States take off on these principles and kind of build out America post-World War II. So much like your ideas that we have, it seems like a lot of people have got L shapes or T shapes or things that fall off the spine or the trunk of the tree, and then wings fall off of that. And then the function itself just sort of leaks out to different places on the site and finds its pattern language for this site, for this family. And yet every model I just showed you is part of that family as well, just different because the actual people have a different program, the site's different, the orientation with the sun is different. So you're all on the right track following that zone there. It'll be exciting to see your work and in the end of April when you come to fruition and show all these pages together. I'll try to get some type of digital show for the Madison students too, to show on a screen in one of the lobbies in the engineering building. So what we're going to work on then is, I think, because a lot of you have already seen this image drawn and photographed a lot of the actual court here, and you can see we struggled with the RP model on this because at this scale, and I think it kind of approximates almost an 1/8 inch model. The delicacy of the framework of his windows here is really difficult when you pull the supports for an RP model out, so that the supports themselves, which are meant to be the frail part, and the architecture is more of a brittle plastic, compounds the issue of trying to keep the architecture there by pulling the mass away from it. So we have to reprint this at some point and make it more sound in terms of a model. So what we're going to do in terms of a composition is look at the street side, and we'll talk about the principles as we move through that kind of bit by bit here. So this is kind of the view shed we're looking at. It's tilted a little bit here off center, so we see kind of somebody coming down from the north, which is more the primary access to the site. And at this point on the south end of the site, you turn left and then move your way around the corner to the southern side and eventually get to the southeast exposure. So this is sort of the private court where all the fenestration faces out to, and he had his little victory garden there for the Depression years. And then out front here, being the way you greet the guests, is the portal for the carport for that one great Cherokee red sports car that's parked out there now. And again, I think I told you before, I believe it's a 1960 Volvo. I think it's a hard top, but the hard top comes off, so it is a convertible, but it's not a rag top. You can double check when you're on the site there. But it looks stunning with it because it's like high design next to high design. So it's really a great home to visit. Okay, so let me line this up on the paper correctly for me here. Okay, so if this is the height of the car, which is not quite 5 feet tall, because it's more of a sports car, then maybe right around here at this point is our horizon line as you're standing next to the car. Work it across the whole thing. And it will see on the horizontal lines, because really our one point here on the left is going to dominate the sketch here. And the right point, you can tell by the roof lines over here, isn't going to come down to the horizon line until I'm well off the page on the right. So this is a left point dominated drawing of it. So these will all, they kind of look, obviously they're parallel in real life, but they're all going to tether down to one point here off the page. A little more arcing up to that line because it's the bottom of the house, a little bit further beneath it. And then the sidewalk out front does an even more demonstrative pitch up to that point as it moves down to the south. Okay. So here's the little bit where the stair will come up from the sidewalk, because the house actually steps down from the height of the walkway up here. So what we're going to do is use this reference point to kind of complete the public aspect of the sidewalk and drive it all the way back towards the south of the property. So this is public domain out here. The city of Madison owns that. The people who own the Jacobs house own from here to the east part of the lot. And there's a little small parkway, because it's more of a tighter neighborhood here. It takes us out to the street. So that's our foreground for the sketch, which will take us to the property. And the subject here will put the trees on the other side of the property, the backdrop, to create our foreground, middle ground, and background. Okay, so really quickly, right above this picture has been sort of earmarked for you yet, but right about there is the top of the big brick chimney, which then gives us that keynote that that's the anchor for all the power, structure, cooking, venting for the home at the crux of that axis. And so we're going to be on that axis on the edge of it coming in, and then take a hard right to walk along this one wall here, which I'll show in a second in terms of how that's articulated. So let's just simply complete the boxes in perspective first, and then we'll work with some of our value of detailing along the way. So first 1936, he's out at Johnson Wax, and he's out at Falling Water, and they're great clients to resurrect his career, because it's been really lean for anybody in the recession time, actually depression. And coming out of that, it took a couple of years for architects to really put back to work. So he worked for the Capital Times, and then he and his wife in 1936 challenged him. And then it's such was that the house wasn't big enough for them, because it's really a 2-bedroom home initially at 1,500 square feet, that they wanted to have more space. So they moved away for a little bit in a different type of home as their kids grew, then came back to Wright several years later and had Jacobs 2 built. And Jacobs 2, when you look it up, is another sort of provocative realm, because it's done in a sort of a horseshoe pattern. So if you complete a complete circle and you complete just one arc of it, that's the floor plan of Jacobs 2. And it's set up where the center of the circle is a solar axis. So basically it traces the sun's movement from the east to the west and lights up all the daylight of the glazing inside the arc for solar gain. And this is back in the late 30s, where people weren't worried about energy. Wright was prescient in that, thinking about what the future is going to hold in terms of homes can collect the energy from the sun and not have to use positive power for it. So this is the cantilevered roof that collects us over the quiet wing, so to speak. So the public wing comes out facing west and south. The private wing comes out from the west and goes due east. And so we're looking at the foot of that L shape as we move in this direction. We'll continue with the flitch beamed front roof line that projects from the home and goes back in space until it's received by part of the back quiet wing that supports it. So it's not as if it's a pure cantilever all in one direction, because the house actually creates an L coming back to support this. But what's close to us over here is flying out in space. So even though this wall seems like it's right on the corner there, this is back at the dimension of the car back here. So if that's the wheel of the car, it's still in front of that. So right about here is where that back wall, where this carport ends for that automobile. So it's a very difficult structure, and yet when you walk by today, it still is remarkably pure in space as being horizontal and not drooping over time, because in Wisconsin, you can get snow that deep, and that's generally registered as 100 or 150 pound per square foot. And that's coming away from, in plan, a roof line that does this, and the only structure for it is here and here. So this whole diagonal here is fluid in space, and that's where he designs this flitch beam to hold that out there. So it's very, very rigid and very counteracting the dead load that's going to be played out by the nature's forces there. Okay, so closer to us is a little bit of a primary support back here in the form of a shear column. And then as that goes back, it finally finds a piece here, which connects then to the movement around this front pier of brickwork, which anchors the entry and kind of separates people coming to the house and the privacy of this whole thing here, to kind of remove the home from being on the street proper. Because it's not a busy street at all, it's a subdivision street, but it's only a block or two off of a major artery in Madison. So it seems like it's kind of urban. And so there's a lot of noise in the area. And so he wants to remove the people from that. So this is just a large house wing wall of skinned wood over the interior space. And the only thing that we actually see up top is his clear story of windows, which a lot of you have employed in your designs as well. So it provides light and ventilation, but isn't part of the actual view shed there, because when you're inside, this is the height of view inside, because you're walking onto a slab on grade. And I can't remember, I think probably due to dew and humidity, I think it's one small step up to get on top of the slab, because it's very difficult to have a slab literally at grade level, because you want to be able to remove that moisture that people would drag in and out if it's flush. So I believe there's one little small tread up here, probably 4 or 6 inches, that takes you into that slab itself. So while we're talking about the slab, and I won't do it on this because we're running out of room to add drawings to it. So I'll do it from an earlier drawing from a while back. And I'm not sure this was, you guys have worked through a part of this, I believe, but here are the sections for the Jacobs one, where it's the poured in place concrete slab. So that slab on grade, it's on a sand footing, so it floats. So he's eliminated, obviously, the basement itself. And then beyond that, he's eliminated the need for a full foundation. Because even if you're on another home that's got a wood plane there, and you want to frame it up, you have to still take that down 4 feet to get to frost line to make sure the structure that isn't going to float and move there. In this case, he's allowing it to move because it's on a sand base. So basically, the whole thing acts as this monolithic piece. And the only part that breaks that zone coming down there is he sinks the actual heating plant for the coiled system that's buried inside the concrete, like a half story below. So in a sense, there's a little tiny basement beneath the kitchen to service the whole structure. Then on top of that, he brings in all of his brick pieces that drop down and kind of, we're going to layer this up here. The brick pieces will come down and match where they're needed in the floor plan there. And then the infill will be more of what we see on the outside skin, the wooden horizontal planking for it. And obviously on the top then sits on all this, the match for this down below of the roof plane. So tease these all out, and he shows the client then how he's saving money, because he'll eliminate, obviously, from the prairie homes, and we've got, 10 of us doing prairie homes, and they're larger scale, maybe a little bit. But back in the day, they would have places for servants' quarters. They definitely have a second floor to them. They'd have a basement, they'd have the hip roof, and they'd be 4-wing at the minimum, sometimes even greater, like the Buffalo home for Martin out in New York that had double crosses in it. So they're more extravagant in size. So he's paring this all down to say, how can I provide the same quality home with less material and less builders on the site? Because it's not just how much the home is in terms of the stuff you spend on material, it's the labor costs. If you reduce labor and how much they're on the site, the house reduces in cost and it gets closer and closer to it. They say the 5,000 was met. Other people say it wasn't. He went over budget. Sometimes when Wright went over budget to prove a point, he would pay the difference. In this case, Wright always charged 10% for any project with construction costs. So $5,000 yielded $500 for him on the commission for a World Heritage Site. So it's pretty spectacular how little money can create grand ideas here. So what we're going to do is do a little more detail, and then we'll come in and start to talk about some of the symbolism of the shapes and forms here. So this one comes up and rushes to the back point here. And chimney comes down. We see a little bit of the edge of this because we're almost flat on viewing it. We see a little bit of the left side here, and we see just a hair of the brickwork coming over here on that side. Because it's not just a pure rectangle here, it's actually an L shape in plan terms it's used for the kitchen, for the boiler downstairs. So it's got multiple purposes to it there. Okay, then our next point is we're gonna strafe the whole home with those horizontals. So we've got a key one already set. So we won't do the exact number of bands here, but just to give the idea for it. So we'll use the horizontal line as a good start to band the home, even the brickwork too. And then the best way to kind of have that rhythm go through that is at our horizon on the brick. It looks like there's 1, 2, maybe 3 courses above that. So 1, 2, and 3 will show us about the dimension of the siding here. And then beneath is 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that's about the scale of the siding that runs and just runs all the way across. And it comes to this corner. And from this view we're drawing it from, the floor plan does kick out by the living room beyond this plane. And we only see a little bit of the edge of that beyond here. So it's not going to come all the way down because it's an L shape where it kicks out. And then this point, and this point. And this is that really cool structural idea that Wright kind of got involved in, because typically it would be a 2x4 or 2x6 stud wall, which gives you nowadays a good place for insulation. Back then people didn't really insulate homes because energy was so cheap. But Wright said, let's eliminate that gap in the amount of lumber and just say that the external siding itself will be structural. And it makes it wafer thin then, because it's only the actual board stock itself. On the inside then is the interior finish, which is also a type of board stock. And when they're screwed together, they've got more structural integrity. But he went to the structural engineer and he said, that still doesn't give you the type of framing or diaphragm you need for this distance across. So then Wright argued that inside along this wall is the home library of the homeowner. So with the shelves along there and their vertical structures to support the books, the whole wall is conceived of by its dead weight of being a wall of library books, or books the homeowner would own. And that in a sense gives its counteract in terms of a waffling diaphragm. So it got passed. So we'll come over here now on this piece, and now we'll do a smaller cut for the brickwork. And again, when you come down to the base here, make sure you start to kick those lines up a little bit to make sure it vanishes up to that right horizon line. Now we go around the corner, we got the same line when we come back, but now we're coming to the left vanishing point. So we'll simply run those back as they find our point on the horizon line there. Space on the top here It's brickwork, so it's the same thickness as this one. And more often than not, Wright would have had a decorative element to finish a prairie home top here. Now, since he's fully engaged in the modern movement now because he said the first modern building, a lot of architectural historians say, is Unity Temple. That's 1906. So we're 31 years away from the first modern building, and Wright designed that. So he knows about the clarity now, things making less decorative things and the ornament of historical trappings on top. So when the brick ends, that's enough. There still is a reveal of a capping for that we see on top of that, but that's it. And so that's enough for Wright just to do the form itself. Okay, we'll get to the car at the end, I think, because that's got different values to it. But now our board work is the same over here on the underside. Take that across. This is going to be in a hard value, so don't worry about too much of this. We'll have to pick it up a little bit to get more depth. And then up here, it's a smaller section of wood siding than the front has up here. And that turns around the corner and comes to the point kind of really obliquely, but we'll try a little bit there. There is a little bit of a planter around the corner here where the L's meet. He sort of accentuates that with about a 18-inch planter that goes back to the vanishing point. So we'll vegetate that in a second. And now we'll just put in some of the landscape around here. So on the site itself, it kind of undulates. There's some topography out here. This sidewalk is actually coming down a little bit of an incline on the slope. So from this point at the very top, there is a walkway off of the city sidewalk, but then from there, it actually steps down toward the home. So we'll do a tread, then the riser, a tread, the riser, a tread, the riser, tread, the riser, and then I think by this point, we're probably down to the grade level where the house is. So it's kind of got an odd view when you drive up to it first. If you're low in the car, you sometimes don't even see this until you get out of the car and get tall enough to be on the premise of this with the person walking by on the sidewalk to get this view. So we wanted to lift you up a bit to see down into the home here. And then this isn't probably the original language of the nature on the site, but this is how the current owner has it. They've got some delicate types of plantings here along this edge to kind of greet people. And that goes the whole walkway. So we'll just kind of keep that as a zone now to organize that. So it's not really a barrier, it's not a hedge, but it does signal that we don't want you to walk directly on the lawn because this is just green space. So that's a plane in space that Wright encouraged around the Usonians to show the former. He didn't like the idea of taking his designed object and covering it with trees adjacent to it. He wants the view out to nature, but don't have nature block the view of the home. So don't put that too close to that. Around this edge, there's some lower hedges that move from the corner of the property. So this being the intersection of a street off the paper to the right, it's heavily wooded here. So it kind of encloses that turn. And it doesn't really open up because this whole side coming down from the left vanishing point over here are all much larger deciduous trees. There's even a couple pines over there as well. I think there's a very tall pine right next to the chimney. We'll draw on here and do the branches for it in a second. But all these trees are this height, maybe even taller, but they're moving down the block to the east. So they kind of create that barrier until the actual floor plan opens up to you. So this is privatized by having no windows on this side. You turn the corner and there's an anchor of more tall trees here, and that tree line continues to right about the edge of the property so that you enter the sort of private garden area, not directly off the street, but from a corner of the property in a perspectival view. So your first view of the home on that side is this view and not an elevational view. So they're very discreet in terms of how and why those trees are planted there. So we can come in and put that large conifer here. And the conifers are a good mix with the deciduous trees because once you lose the leaves of the deciduous, you lose your privacy in the winter. So this is sort of a backup because they stay green year round. And then for now, we'll just kind of do some rambling kind of forms there, which we'll use to shape the edges of our roof line as we kind of put in value. And then it drops down on the east side. So all the sunlight from the south and east that warms the garden comes from this direction. And then the vegetation picks up between this home and the adjacent home just to the north of it. So the lot line is probably somewhere along over here in depth. He's got a little property. He kind of wedged the L towards the edge of the property, so there's more space on the garden side. And then from our vanishing point, we can show that kind of same as this one rises up, this one will rise here to show the tree line that separates the two properties. So there'll be a point of dark that we'll draw in a second on this side of the property. So we've got our bracketing for the home kind of shaped. So you got the relationship with the view and the idea of the home projecting out to the natural scenery there. Okay, then we can move into just the value now. And you guys are well into that where you have to go from page white at 0% and work your way through grays. So the bulk of the project is about 60% gray. And you save your ultimate blacks for the final end there, the 100%. And that's why in this case, I like to use the black Prismacolor because it can give us a very strong black discerning kind of value on the paper here. So let's assume that we want to showcase the western elevation. Let's say it's late afternoon and the sun's coming in at 4 o'clock. And so there's a lot of light coming from perpendicular where we are. So all these front surfaces are well lit, but they're under eaves too. So the sun will cast some shadow line to a certain distance. And we'll assume it's this high. So with this eave projecting out this distance, we're going to lose the full value of the sun here, all the way across this cantilevered roof line. And then I'll cloak our windows as well. So eventually we'll have dark within this dark I'm drawing now. And this is just a placeholder for now. We're going to get much darker as we move on. Just assign some preliminary value. Same thing as here. It doesn't project too much in our direction, but there is a little bit lift, probably a course or two, just for the movement of water so it doesn't stick on the skin of the wood there. The underside, obviously. Right now we see a little bit of the underside here because this will go back to our horizon line to a point about there and across. So that whole bit gets grayed out. A little bit of that. And now the parts of the building we see that's on the left of the sun's angle. So if it's striking here strong, it isn't hitting this plane at all. That's all in shade. So we can come back to that part of the brick wall, that pier there. And then because this is so deep, it probably isn't going to see much light at all. So we'll go ahead and draw that dark value there around the car's edge. Back behind that front post. And then we'll see eventually into this deep corner where it sees less and less light. And then where the door opening is, we'll probably go very dark because you might see, let's say the door is open, the screen door is there. You'd see a little ribbon of very, very dark within here, which calls out the door because in many of your schemes now, the general public's not going to know where the front door is. There's kind of secrets to it to get to it, but it's not prominent. You don't ever really look from the public aspect to a 3x8, a 3x7, or 3x6x8 hunk of architecture that says, here's where you enter. It's much more of a mystery of the entrance, not why you're here. It's the space you enter into is why you're here. So now we can do the same for the value around the building. This will help pull out the brilliance of the sun when it does strike some of our pieces. So we'll assign that value. It'll come down to grade here. And then we'll use this, the dark conifer in the back, to grade it a mass around that Great bastion of masonry there. And then the deciduous trees are also going to be a value that's against the bright of the sky. And I can just draw over that plan that I did earlier. And then take that off the page to the right. Whoops. And we're going to bring that around to the base of this piece. This is going to go all the way to the back side of the home. I'm darkening it up right now. But those trees are going to dissipate a bit, and we'll probably see some of the carriage of those trees, since they're deciduous, come down and meet our hedges here. So that'll be a brighter area, but we'll still use that value here for now to hold that tree coming down and wrapping around our corner here. That's a key aspect here, to use your values to celebrate these planes in space. So whenever you have your final rendering ready to go, you really want to talk about this being a sculpture. And the sculpture is going to read better if you really turn the light on and show light, shade, and shadow. So that's kind of primary. We can come over to the car maybe and say that this one side of it we see less light. And obviously can come down to the three wheels that show, and show that for now. And because it's inside the car, all the interior, we'll probably get a little glimpse of maybe the dashboard there, so that the inside of the car is darker than the outside skin for now. Then we'll come back in a little bit. And then obviously beneath here, the cast shadow would probably give us a dark underneath the car on both sides. And then we'll have it rest on the ground for now. Okay, now we've got all of our sort of light and the shade taken care of. Oh, I didn't do this yet. A little bit there too. And the shade on that part of that roof. Next is to do the shadow, and you never want the light sort of when you're playing God of Sun here. You don't want it to be absolutely perpendicular, because you get no movement of the cast shadow, because it wouldn't throw a shadow if it was just directly in front of that. So turn that sun a little bit more to the southeastern aspect and let it kick a shadow kind of coming off this way. And that'll help make the form more pronounced. So use the same angle here as you do over here as well. And then wherever this projects back and casts a shadow on it, this plane will throw a line back this way in the same piece there. So this will all be dark, and then come back to a point where we'll vanish to our right vanishing point. So that'll have a line, this column will have a line going back. And I think outside of that having a thing, that's probably our only shadow we'll have left. I guess conceivably there is a little bit of the pad that comes out here. There's sort of a walkaway mark. It'd be such a little bit, barely even draw that in there. Okay, so that's a darker dark. So come back into this one merging with the side shadow, and that'll be darker over here, which helps frame the car. And then I'll come all the way back over here to the back side, because that's all very deep and dark inside all that area. And then this column going back toward the vanishing point. And like I mentioned, a nice strip of dark for the screen door that says there's a glimmer of hope of how I get inside this home. Okay, so now the vegetation in the front, we'll wrap around from the side here where people, obviously when you change ownership, nobody really changes the mature trees in the site, but they do change their ground cover. So people like to shape these differently or change the species. So this owner's been there since the 70s, I think, when he bought the property and diligently restored it. So this is probably all his ideas. I think actually his son lives there now. Mr. Dennis, Professor Dennis. And then over here, there's no real vegetation outside of a little bit on the very edge here, but we're so close to not seeing it all, it would look weird not to show it, because if we do it too big, it's encroaching on the dry that takes it in here, because it actually does fit 2 cars if you really cheat 2 small ones in there. But it was designed for 1 larger car, because they didn't have small cars really back down in the 30s. They were all kind of gargantuan. And then we'll use the horizon line, the vanishing point, to show the kind of construction joints in the sidewalk as it comes by here for us. And then I'll flatten that zone down there so that when we come over here, we kind of go off in that angle, and it keeps that on the ground plane. We'll always use the left vanishing point the whole time. And then because that's probably concrete, that's a brighter tone than the gravel pitch that he has that kind of gently slopes down the hill. So we kind of treat that as a lighter gray now away from the concrete. So we're separate these planes and spaces as we move around the house. And then the grass is grass green, and it's actually a lighter tone in the skin here because that's sort of a deep stained layered wood system he's got there as they lap over each other there, the plywood sandwich wall. I think the entire dimension of what happens here is 2¼ inches between the outside skin and the inside skin. So that's really nothing, and for architectural skin work. So he's got the weight of the books then that come off on the side of it and give the depth that he needs for that structural integrity. But we like to have that tone there because now the walkway is a little bit brighter. It comes over here and boxes out, but the rest of this plane is the grass, so we can give that a tone for now. That'll set off the woodwork a little bit. And then in the foreground, because I mentioned this is actually the sidewalk ends, then we have a parkway. We'll come to the edge of the parkway, and then the curb drops down to the street. So there's the top of the curb. And this is all grass here. Then continue it there, which gives us sort of a run up to the mechanics of how the planes work on a particular property. I don't think we need another tone for this here. We'll just sort of title the project there and make it seem like that was intentional to have a nice, long, thin triangle on the side of it. And our job is to draw the building again in less time with more value. So you don't spend that much time on higher values. Now they're at 40% gray. Now the 60s and 70s and 80s go in small parts throughout the scheme, and we'll get to black right at the tail end. So the most prominent ones are probably going to be in the fenestration, and we only have a little bit on this side, so go pretty quick. So come back in and double up the structure for these small awning windows at the clear story level. And I think they stop short of the edge there, yeah, right there. Because we want to build a base for them all, and then the height for them all, and then simply poche in a darker value, leaving the structure a little bit brighter. We don't want to lose that. We want to see the support. And so that's, as a dark now, we want that relationship of now it reads like an interior because it's darker than the exterior skin. And we'll come back on our shade sides and make those a little bit stronger really quick. And obviously the undersides of the roof lines too. There you go. And this one is pretty close to the edge of the singular column and the pier over here, but yet still cantilevers beyond it a little bit. So again, we'll come down a course or two to show that that's covering that pier in terms of water movement on the building. There's that piece. And now we'll line out all the lines in the drawing so far, which are neutral gray. And we're going to have them chase to 80% or even darker if they hold space behind them. So for instance, this line at the corner doesn't hold space because there's a plane there. You can't get inside that at all. This line over here, you could then actually pass beyond it because that's the corner on the other side of it. So this line, because it commands volume, is a darker line in the front. So those are easy to find kind of on the entire exterior skin of the building. Those lines get a little bit stronger. So you wrap your way around all the volumes which interconnect, and you're teaching people in the drawing, because we're trying to do this with the illusion of being done on a piece of paper with great volume to it. That this is floating in space, and the space is actually on the sheet of paper. And the edge of the home over here has got two strong lines for the first change of planes. Obviously, this is a good one because it's the end of the brick plane. Under the ground. This top side is actually holding space, minimal that it is, but the horizon line's beneath it, so it's above it that's holding space. And this goes around the corner to the back. And this comes down to the edge. And that helps kind of drive home the point of where all the real structure is used to create this illusion on the paper. There's that front column, a little bit of shadow cast on that. This edge, which shows us to that front door right around the corner. And now I might want to give a little attention to the car that's got its profile, where a little bit of a roadster type of car here. It's a large roadster, and the edge of it coming down to its profile of the wheel in the front, to the back wheel, to the right, and over to this side. Tail lights. Steering wheel. And then because it is glazed, it'll be a little bit darker than just being open air. And maybe a tone for the license plate. Some line work for the bumper. And I'm going to go to the trees and say that they're three-dimensional forms, not just planes with the same gray. So the lower third, you see, is more of a dark, and that'll help again pull out this white more. Lower part of the pine. As you add your darks, you can shape more of the branch types you find in a coniferous tree. Do a little bit more of the trunk now, because you see that you won't see it as much in a deciduous tree, but you do in a conifer. You see more of the actual structure itself. Some of the horizontals that hold the pines out there, the branches. And the next series of deciduous trees that are to the south side of the home. And again, they're not the subject. We're not drawing trees here. We're just drawing an excuse for value next to the home. And then I said before, we're going to bring these down in little trunks to show them going behind this vegetation. And these just might be small buried bushes. And do the same for the front here. So it's got a base, whatever planted here, it's darker right where it comes down, kind of kisses the sidewalk. And flowers up lightly on top of it. Over there. And we probably want to gradate the grass a little bit so that maybe it strikes darker right where it meets the home and turns to a lighter gray over here. So we can come at that corner and accentuate those edges. So the rest of the sketch now, we're going to manipulate any area of tone where we've been sort of myopic or to the same density of tone value. So that plane now changes from a darker gray to a lighter gray. This whole plane of the car is going to be darker on this point, and it'll cast a shadow back this way. But we're going to make that shadow darker and darker as it gets deeper to the back of this property. So it's blackish right where it gets to the bottom of that board. Turns the corner, it's probably darker here than the shadow is out front here as the light washes about. So even the shadows themselves, they kind of manipulate the value there to get more animation with the idea of the home. And then we'll bring down some of the strokes of support for the tree line over here for the neighboring property. I think there's a whole series of privacy bushes there as well. Because this was a double lot, I think the neighbors on both sides have single lots. So the neighbors are closer and the openness is actually by the intersection over here. And I think we can go ahead and kind of do a little bit here, and this is going to be sort of the core of the drawing here. So we need to do a little more of the forming of moving up this piece here to get to the sidewalk. And then because we see the front face of the sidewalk kind of going down, that'll be a barrier line. And we kind of see the edge of the grass popping up with its height over the sidewalk. So it's not just a straight line. And this one, right where it touches the sidewalk, it's kind of an accretive line that shows the nuances of nature growing over that hard edge. And now this is much more of a manicured cityscape, so that's going to have more of a cut edge to it, which takes us to the street. Okay, so now we go to the depths of how this whole mechanics is in the center here. We're going to put more of our darks right in the zone here, so our eyes attracted right to the fulcrum of all the movement. So as light comes in, it's darkest. This whole thing is in shade. It's the darkest shade at the top, which receives the least amount of light. So we can drop that down. And on the back wall, it's also darker there at that point. So we can bring that down. Same with this coming down, because light bounces around and lights up the bottom third of this plane of wood back there. And leaves that darker and darker, which lets the front piece up here seem more brilliant. It's the same tone, it's the same stain as the rest of the wood. It's just it's receiving light by itself with dark elements around it, so it appears like it's almost a white. So this side, this edge, and I think then we can gradate part of the skins now, because it's never going to read just purely one tone. It's going to sort of feather itself down. So against the sky here, it'd be nice to go a little bit darker with the tone against the sky and let it go white when it reaches the conifer over here. So let that value gradate over this way. Same is true here. Maybe keep it white next to that, but let it become over in this corner a little bit darker next to this white. So we're going to use our ability of putting grays next to white to make the whites a little bit more dominant in the sketch. Darker black there. Put in a more sense of movement of car seats in here. Maybe the rim. Maybe the glazing on the side. Structure. So to pull this one out, it's a tone of brick, and the brick's about the same tone as the siding, but we'll pop that out a little bit by making sure our siding starts a little bit darker next to that, and then fades again to the white. And we move across. This is deeper under the roof line over here, so we can come up to it and gradate that a little bit, but then this back piece is a darker tone than this corner, so it's going to really pop that off of that corner edge, and then we'll really strengthen our cast depth here by going from a 40% gray to probably a 60 or 70, because this is indeed set back 2 or 3 feet from the actual skin behind it. So this will go much darker. We're taking that all the way down to the first course of siding. Which means we have to come back into our windows and gradate those a little bit deeper as they get to 80 or 90%. And you can make it a little more regular, because once you're in the room, you're going to see different aspects going inside. There might be pendant lamps or things like that. So we can vary it and show a variety of verticals or horizontals kind of coming through the space, so it isn't just the same repetitious form. And that makes it seem like there's activity behind those windows and not just a flat wall. Okay, so we're kind of closing in on this. I think we'll edge a couple of things a little bit more over here to kind of make it pronounced. It seems like this lower lip could use a little bit more attention. Its way there. A Pull this out a little bit. It could probably, if these are going to stay lighter here, we could probably take this tip and go a little bit darker beneath it and run that right up to that edge. So there's contrast there. Probably the grass line itself, as it grows, it can show that kind of a creative nature of being that darker tone next to the wood. And you'll see the grass maybe not freshly cut, just a little bit longer. So it softens that. Here's our planter, which you can just assume it's going to have some type of flowering bush there. That'll be a nice dark against the wall going around the corner. And then same siding on the box that holds the plant. We'll come back in and articulate the shadow a little bit more on the ground against our wall. So it's just steps now. It's nicer to go whatever pleases your eye. So all the information is there. We can stop whenever we want, but I'm just sort of settling into the contrast that's appropriate to make sure the whole thing seems complete in a sense for this hour sketch we're doing here. A little bit blacker there. This a little bit darker in there. And then our last little thing in about 10 seconds is absolute black. So I think our choices for that are to keep this zone right in here, which will draw our eye, because the black is what's going to get the viewer's attention. So a good way to assess a sketch is take the image of it and rotate it so it loses some of its context. And is the image itself still intriguing? Is the idea of just where the value is an attractive image in terms of lights and grays and tones? If that's working as an abstract, and now you get the information settled down to real gravity and the life of it, it works even better that way. So I'm going to say that this is probably the most dominant black we want to take the eye back to that door. And we'll use it all the way up to the edge here. And then the first couple of windows to show the interiority of the transept up here. Make them a little bit stronger, a little more delineated. And then you don't have to do it the whole way because people will understand that that information repeats over there. This edge, drop that down. Maybe this could be a little stronger too, a little bit deeper on that cast shadow. And there's a red car, so we'll go a little bit deeper with tone there and maybe even wash it out so it isn't white. If we leave it white, it looks too much like the subject, I think. So we'll leave it a little bit grayed out. So it's secondary. But prominent, because obviously, Wright, if he wasn't a car enthusiast, he probably would have designed the carport. So he saw cars as something on his site that he would keep that he didn't design. Everything else, when you walk inside there, everything in the kitchen, it wasn't stock cabinetry from Home Depot. It was stuff Wright designed for the kitchen itself. So he's very particular about everything around the home, except for the automobile, which he really cherished in his own life. Okay, so there we are. We could do a little quick titling over here if you like. Just see, I'll find us a nice little flat line to draw on. And we'll use some kind of writing and lettering. Sometimes he'd use eagle feathers, sometimes he'd move between the skinny and tall letters. And there we go, the Jacobs One house from 1937. To start a whole new era of building out America, and the sort of the ultimate placement for this would have been in Broadacre City, which you read about in the biography, which was his dream urban plan for the sort of Western movement of people across the country and building out America. So you'd have not just this type of acreage, it's something even larger. So instead of having a small garden, you'd actually have a small farmette. So you'd be much more self-sufficient come out of the Depression. And it became a really way to think about the future of suburban America. So much to the disdain of sprawl today, but he's part of that play that allowed people to do that. So we mentioned before that's one of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. This was 7 other sites. We have a couple left to do this semester. It's when the Architectural Forum covered Wright's work, and they put in a whole series of homes. The one that was most talked about, that people want to know more about because obviously they could afford it, was the Jacobs One home. So even though he only had 40 some of these things built and more planned, but 40 actually still exist out there, the impact it had on the ranch home, open living, room and dining room, living room, kitchen, all kind of run together, became ubiquitous in the 1950s, post-World War II. So put a small pitched roof on it, eliminate some of the details, and you've got ranches across America. So it impacted it in sort of a secondary way. So that'll be it for now. I can stay out for questions. Here's our view. See how we did here. And I managed to print out the brand new Usonian, which is designed for his largest commission he's ever done in one area for one client. That's the Florida Southern University. At that time, he thought the head administrator would live in one of his Usonian homes. This was 1942 when he did the Florida project. So it never got built. And then it became such a notoriety for having Wright in Florida. It's a great tourist spot. And they finally had a fundraising campaign and they built one. So this is the one that came out of Wright's sort of archive of things down in the desert. And they built a Usonian for kind of like to complete the picture that's down there. It's the one missing link to the authority of that. So it's the only kind of like single family-ish house down there. The rest of it is all collegiate work. But it's, again, in that mantle of ideas, it's a much bigger building than the one we just drew. Again, it still has the same problem that with the RP models. It has delicacy of the little fine pieces get destroyed by the braces when we pull them out. So I have to work on this one a second time through to clean it up. So just make sure by 11 o'clock next Tuesday, you give me your final version of that great interior shot that shows what it's all about. Because this image right here, curb appeal, realtors will say, that's where either the husband or wife decide right there, that could be my home. That single view, because that tells everybody else what they're about and what their likes and dislikes are when they choose a home like that. So this curbside view is a really key view. The next one is when you're sort of in that living, dining, kitchen, cooking area type of place where you kind of see the heart and soul of the house. They're not going to make a decision based on the master bedroom. They're not going to make a decision based on restroom necessarily, but where do people live inside the house? We're going to entertain people inside the house. And so that's that big image you're going to show me next week at 11 o'clock. I'll print those out and I'll assess them. So you get your second 10% grade. And then for those who need some more work, for the final presentation, you get one more time to turn it around. If you're still struggling a little bit, to turn it a third time when you get 30% done on all your work to date. And that way everybody has one last chance to kind of repackage things and do everything at the highest level of quality you possibly can. So any questions?
If I updated like all of my drawings, like my 2 exteriors, my interior, in my plan. Do you want me to submit all 4 of those for review before we do the big review?
I didn't hear the first part. Tell me the first part of the question again.
Sorry, if I like updated and redid my exterior renderings as well as my plan and my obviously my interior, do you want me to submit all 4 for review before we do our big?
Yeah,
final
sure. I'll look
review?
at new exteriors too. A lot of people I thought were very close. They just had to sort of, the drawing had to be a little bit better. But if you're changing the language of the home, yeah, I should take a look at that too. But obviously, that's been evaluated at the first 10%. But again, you're going to get 30% more on all these things together. Still have time to have improvement for that. There's a lot of growth and aptitude there, but I can look at it now. I can wait till the final thing. But if you want more feedback earlier, send it next week too.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Mr. Keen.
Yeah.
It's Pete. I had earlier today submitted a updated version of the exteriors, and my first question was actually the same question she just asked, so that's taken care of.
Good.
But the other, I do have a stylistic choice question actually to bounce off you and see what you think. I did a thing with the flat roofs of my structure where I pitched a middle section, a very large middle section of it up on a slight angle, and like inside the building, it does exactly what I want it to do. Outside, yeah, okay, can get away with it maybe, but as far as it fitting in with Frank Lloyd Wright's ideas of what and what not to do with roofs, I'm not sure that would actually fly.
Well, are we talking about a shed roof? Do you know the language of a shed?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. It's just really slight. Let me think. I think I put it on a. Oh, I forget the rise and run of the slope of the thing, but it's probably like a 3 degree, maybe 2 or 3 degree incline, and then it's 2 massive overhangs on each side of the house.
Let me explain a shed roof. This is a flat roof, right?
Okay.
And
Right.
then if somebody wanted to come to this point, because let's say there's a tremendous view over a lake over here to the right. If you come to this point
Okay.
and you break that plane and you lift this one up as a shed, it's all just one movement. It's not moving in 2 directions. It's literally just lifting up this way. That's a shed roof. And the shed roof is part of the partee of the Usonian language. If you go to Storer's book that has all of his homes and plans, he's got a separate page that says, here's the different roof types that Wright used in Usonians, and shed's one of them.
Sure.
He's actually got
Great.
He's got hip roofs too, and he's got pitched roofs that are 3 and 12 with the gable on them. So he did move the planes, so he kind of created almost like a speaker opens up to show the sound better, to have the view be better. Yeah. His roof line would open up too. It just can't be too diminutive. If you're going to do it, it's the key to the house. It can't be secondary.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Because that's kind of what it sounds like 2 to 3 degrees isn't even worth it. It looks like it was built wrong. If you're going to do it, do it and get it up to at least a 3 and 12, I'd say.
Okay. Yeah, because I actually had done it and I did my renderings, my exteriors, and I looked at them and I'm like, you know what? You almost can't see it on one of them, and on the other, it makes you wonder if that's just lost in the perspective warp or something.
Yeah, exactly, right. It's just too subtle. But I think there's also at least 2 other students, if you go back to that one film that talks about all people's exterior perspectives, 2 other people are doing shed roofs.
Sure, okay. So, I wasn't sure about mixing and matching like I'm doing, but I think because the rest of the roofs are all flat. And,
that's typically how it's done. They're all flat, then he uses one shed. Don't mix a multiple pitch with a shed with a flat. Then you're just kind of going crazy. You just want to do it very subtle. It's dominated by the flat, and then you accentuate one key room with an angle, and that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I looked at the I think the Seth Peterson cottage out in Yeah, and that kind of struck me, and I thought, that's not quite that extreme, but maybe actually closer to that extreme. Would be all
Yeah.
right. So
Yeah,
All right.
well, and Seth,
Well, great.
Seth Peters is very cool because it's a golden section and plan, and it's a golden rectangle in section.
Oh,
So the
really? Oh,
pitch
wow.
is actually the golden rectangle. So
Very
he wasn't
interesting.
messing around with what this should be. He just went right to the gods and
Yeah.
realized that's the engineering of people that created us. So I'm going to go with that.
Yeah, that's cool. Wow, and I would love to see that place, and it looks like it does open for tourists.
Well,
but I
you
don't know
can
about
rent
the
it.
time of year.
You can rent it. It
Oh, wow.
holds 8 to 12. So get 11 of your friends, and you have to go
No
for
kidding.
2 nights at least. But it's
Wow.
a rental property.
Interesting. Oh, that'd be
Yeah.
neat. Huh.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
right there by
beautiful.
Mirror Lake. So you can go on the all the junky water park stuff and then stay in the Seth Peterson at night.
Sure. Wow. Oh, cool. All right. Well, thanks.
Yeah.
I did. I think I emailed over the updated
Yeah.
renders. But
Who
I
was
think,
who was the third Pete? There was it was you, another Erdman, and then another Pete.
that's actually that's my work name, my professional alias that I do bike design stuff through. It's just cyclists are an obsessive bunch, and I occasionally get them showing up at my door in the middle
They're
of
both
the night.
you.
So yeah.
They're both you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Good.
should be changing at some point before I graduate.
Okay, good. I got it.
Anyway, thanks.
Okay.
And send you an update next week. All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Abby, Jared, any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay.
I'll just listen again.
All right. Good luck. Looking forward to it next week.
Thank you.
Have a good night.